I'm sorry. Hey, everybody. What I was saying was, as Carlos was, it's hard to say all that we want to say in 15 minutes. So it doesn't stop today. It doesn't stop tomorrow. We have to take this and we have to expand, because 15 minutes is not enough to tell you what we need to tell you, but we want to tell you because we need all of you. I heard an advocate say yesterday, well, if you're not with me, then I'm going to move on, or something that they had said. And I thought, nobody should not, because what we are doing is anyone can do it. Okay. So I want to start today with reading something. Now I want you to understand what I'm reading. I'm reading in an interview in 1994. This was by journalist Dan Baum. So in case you want to look this up, let me write my time down because I'm really hard at yeah. And he was interviewing John Ehrlichman. And John Ehrlichman was President Nixon's domestic policy chief, okay, in 1971. But the interview that I'm about to read, and some of you already know this, was from 1994, okay? So these were the exact words in quotes that he said. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or against blacks. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know that we were lying about drugs? Of course we did. Okay, that is mind-blowing, because that is the beginning. Being the history teacher that I am, I teach high school history. I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm not going to bore you with a big history lesson, but you really need to know to understand really where this all happened. I mean, why? Well, people say, oh, it's terrible, but you really kind of need to know, what's going on. So in 1968, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act. Okay, so we're going back to 1968. And that kind of gave, wiretapping. That kind of opened up the, and if we can wiretap people, we can catch people. I mean, I can wiretap my, teenage daughter, you know what I'm saying? Like, once we were able to wiretap people, of course, common sense is going to tell you crime is going to go up. Okay. So, so that's what this brought. It brought grants, more grants for more law. They wanted more law. They wanted more law enforcement because they were seeing an influx in crime. So, and I'm going to tell you in a minute why. It's so, I saw a meme a few years back that said, maybe the system isn't corrupt. It was built this way, and it was built this way. And you guys are going to find out today, it was built this way. And so in the early 1970s, we had what was called intermittent sentencing. Okay. And what that was is that's where parole boards would go in. Someone would do their time. Parole boards would go in and say, you know what? According to this person's satisfactory behavior, of course, that, again, common sense. If you reward somebody for having good behavior or earn time from working or, just getting up and going to work, they're going to probably do better so they can come home sooner, right? So this is what was going on, was the parole board was actually the ones who were going in and saying, okay, this person, had satisfactory behavior, good earned time. They did, work, the educational programs, the way that it should be, and the way that we're trying to get it back to be. So let's, this is the way that they controlled the prison population. So let's let them free if they've done good. Well, this led to criticism. And that, that they were too soft on criminals. We hear that, they're too soft on criminals. So by the late 70s, early 80s, states began. So a lot of people think that mandatory minimums, which we are about to introduce and talk to you about, is just a federal thing. I'll have people on our group pages, they'll go, oh, well, that's federal. And I'm like, you don't understand, it's not just federal, because anytime you see something federal, you see it trickle down to state. I mean, it just does. And if you'll really do, your research, you'll figure that out. It's not just federal. It's like Cut 50, Topeka Sams really fought hard for the Dignity Act. Yes, it was passed under the First Step Act that we're going to talk about in a minute. But she really worked now with the states, and that's where women can't be shackled anymore when they're pregnant. at a certain, trimester. They can't, they get more sanitary napkins. So that filtered down to states. And we have several states that have actually enacted that and are, doing that now. So we're at the late 70s, early 80s, these states begin to start doing, looking at sentencing guidelines. They say, we are not going to just let the parole board decide. We're going to put some guidelines. So in 1971, Nixon then declared a war on drugs. Okay. And this was aimed to stop illegal drug use, distribution, trade. And I mean, again, I can't do this in 15 minutes, but if you really go back to the history of this during the Mexican Revolutionary War, and I promise I won't bore you with that, you'll realize why we had so much immigration, illegal drug use, many years later, of course, but really not many years later, because we're really only in the early 70s at this time. So they wanted to drastically increase these prison sentences for dealers and users. They said, okay, we're going to make examples out of them. But let's back up a minute, okay? So, like I told you, that you're going to understand where this tragedy in America started, okay? It actually started, again, like I said, in way, 1850s, but we won't go back that far. But in 1914, there was the Harrison Act. And that was Congress regulated and taxed distribution of opioids and cocaine. Okay. So they're saying you can do it, but we're going to tax it and we're going to regulate it. Okay. This is 1914. So we have what's going to happen. Our generations and our cultures are going to learn that, hey, I can use this as long as it's taxed, as long as it's regulated. Use it. The next generation, and so we've got these generations using these same, tactics. And then in 1937, we did see the Marijuana Tax Act. And again, that's a whole nother, ball game. So get this. So Nixon signed the 1970, Controlled Substance Abuse Act that I just told you about, that would regulate certain drugs, cocaine. 1971, a year later, the same president declared a war on drugs. I mean, you set this up this way. You set this up, and you see what I've read that his chief, they did this. And again, that I mean, what can we do about that now? But I want you to understand that these mandatory minimum laws weren't just, oh, well, we're just going to lock your loved one away for years and years. And I don't understand why administration after administration after administration has continued to follow these same harsh, inhumane laws. And they have, for whatever reason. But we'll get there. So 1986, that was the big year. And some of you are on here now are going to know exactly what I'm about to say. And that was when Ronald Reagan expanded. He wanted to expand the war on drugs. His wife did that. She did that she wasn't the red ribbon, but she was the war on drugs. It was this big thing. So they passed under the Reagan administration. It took very little time from the time it was brought to the House, to the Senate, to be signed. It was a month, I think, 5-6 weeks. It was it was amended a lot of times, but it was the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, and it established the mandatory minimums, which was criticized for having racial ramifications again. And the reason why for that, and I know some of you are going to be blown away when I tell you this, but there were racial ramifications. So when you do hear people that have been in prison for years and years and say this was a racial situation, it honestly was, because 5 grams of crack cocaine, 5 grams of crack cocaine, which was mostly used by African-American men, gave a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence now, 500 grams of powder cocaine, same thing, we just add something to make it crack, right? But it is predominantly used by white Americans, was 500 grams. 5 grams to 500 grams had the same penalty. That is why we saw so many people that were released last year on the crack cocaine laws, because they went back and said, you have got to be kidding me that this, this happened. And so, and during this time too, we saw like Truth in Sentencing, which is requiring the 85% that you guys see that your loved ones abolishing parole. That was all Truth in Sentencing, because they were saying like, we have to have truth in sentencing. If someone's sentenced to 5 years, they need to do at least 85%. Well, they had already taken away programs. They had taken away good time. And I'm not saying totally, but the majority, they have taken all that away. So what's going to happen? You're not going to be earning that time. So you are going to be, you are going to be serving more of that sentence now that the parole board's not coming in. It was a one size fits all. A lot of you have heard, us say that. And it went from 50,000 drug offenses in 1980 to 400,000 drug offenses in 1997. And things we discovered was minimum mandatories. They didn't protect the law, or they don't protect the law. All they do is disrupt the balance of justice, because what we are doing now with mandatory minimums is the prosecutors and the politicians are who are sending our loved ones to prison. Some people who have never stepped a foot in a prison, people, judges don't have the discretion. Yes, they have the discretion to go to the lower end on federal. I'm not exactly sure in all states, because we have different laws in different states, but they really don't have the discretion. We have had so many judges say, I didn't want to sentence them. That we've had judges leave their jobs as judges because they said, I just couldn't keep sending people away anymore. It was unbelievable that this man or woman who has never been in trouble in their life, I'm having to give them 20 years because they had 2 guns, they had drugs, these stacking charges were just unbelievable. And so what do you think happened now? So we're in 1986, 1987, 1988, we're rolling along. I mean, we're locking people up left and right. So what happens? We need more prisons, right? We need more prisons because now we're increasing so much. So here comes the Clinton administration, and they passed the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. That did not, a lot of people think that had to do with, or that was the reason for the mandatory minimums. It wasn't. The mandatory minimums, as I've told you, really date back from the 60s, but you can really see it in 1986. But what that did, the Clinton administration, was it just ripped through communities because of the massive incarceration. And this is where we saw the 3 strikes, the mandatory life sentences. Now, we did see that during this administration. They did hire 100,000 new police officers, 9.7 billion funding for new and expanded prisons. So they wanted to add to prisons that were already there and expand. I know some of you who've been doing this for years, you remember, like I remember when there was like 6 prisons in the state of Texas and 1 women's prison. And I you know what I mean? It was just unbelievable. And they expanded death penalty offenses. So it was atrocious. And so most of the funds were dedicated to punitive rather than rehabilitative. So this is where we really start seeing the decline in 1986, 87, all the way through 2000, or even through, what we're seeing recently. Our programs were gone. Like, we still see loved ones say, well, I can't get, because it's kind of like this. I live in West Virginia. Okay. I moved here 5 years ago from Texas. In Texas, we saw those Votex centers leave about in the 90s. I mean, not leave, but you used to could get auto body in high school, and you could get, that cosmetology and all that in high school. You really don't see that anymore because we have the big push for college, right? So what is that going to do? Okay. We're pushing everybody to go to college. So that's going to close Votex centers. Well, West Virginia really never got there because most of these kids really, they're not interested in that. They're interested in the blue collar jobs, the jobs in the mountains. So they have Votex centers in every high school here. And it's literally like a blast end of the 90s, but that's what happened. Like, we took it away. And we're having to slowly now. Texas, that's where my point there. Texas wants to go back to the Votex. What do you think they're going to have to do now? They're going to have to build it. They're going to have to build programs. They're going to have to prove, budget money. It's going to take years and years to get back to that. And that's what I feel like is going on, with us. So we didn't really see much reform until the Obama administration, which, as most of you know, was around 2013. Attorney General Holder and the Department of Justice launched a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system. And what this was called Obama Clemency 2014. And this is where you guys come in. That is very important, because this is where I want to really teach you, and we want to teach you to advocate for those who just say, well, I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to do. If that specific time your loved one qualified and you did not get the paperwork in, let's say between, I think it was like April to October of the next year, I think, but if you didn't, you don't even qualify. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So like, just like with this COVID-19, if you didn't get your paperwork in that was specific to what it is, it's not over yet, but in a couple more, probably another month or two, as things start, it'll probably be, that's it. There's a limited window that you as the loved ones have to know, because if you don't know that, that's huge to not be able to, do that. So we did see, the Obama clemency 2014, there were several hundred that were granted clemency or commutations on that. We're seeing a major overhaul of the criminal justice system with the First Step Act. It is slow. People are already like, well, my loved one hasn't been moved 500 miles, but you guys, this takes a while. This takes time to repair. But with the First Step Act, offenders can earn more good time. They can move closer to home if their programs, that meets. There's no restraints. That's already in place for the pregnant women, the dignity part, more female products, sentencing reform. We're just seeing a lot of sentencing reform, you guys. We are seeing, let me see, 15. Okay. And I know that I'm almost there. I have like 2 minutes. So I want to wrap it up with saying, these are the things that you can do to help. And we are going to expand on this. We're going to actually do some Zoom meetings on just specific advocating. But the first thing you do is you need to get educated. And I don't mean by, being in drama groups on Facebook and wasting your time with people who don't want change. I don't mean reading fake news articles. I don't mean things like that. I mean, read your laws. You've got to go in there and figure out exactly what it is that you're asking for. You can't just call legislation anymore and say, we want change. That's not going to work. We have to go in there and say specifically, use their verbiage on it. We want change. Your policy says this, whatever it is, but you've got to become educated. And I mean, that's so important. Number 2, you need to network. You need to leave all the trauma groups, like I said, and you need to find your people. You need to find Amy Povich is who taught me from ground up. I met her in Washington, D.C. I never thought I'd have my kids and be in Washington, D.C., but you have to find your people. FAM is probably my #1 resource. And this isn't an advertisement for FAM, because FAM doesn't need an advertisement. This is to tell every single one of you, FAM, you can find everything you need on FAM to get started, and then you're going to have to do your work. And last but not least, take breaks, and it's exhausting work to do this. It's exhausting. Don't give up. There's too many of us out here now that we can support each other. But the main thing is having the confidence to know, to get started. Message me, comment with questions, and you guys know, you come in my inbox, I am going to help you get started. I want to thank Plus for doing this. And just it's unbelievable. And you guys, I'm closing with this. We need a revolution. We need a revolution. We can't just say, oh, we need change. Okay, we'll pray for you. It's not working anymore. We need every single one that views this today, next week, next year, next month to get on board. Okay. All right. Well, thank y'all. And I look forward to some of your questions at the end.